Chapter 16. October 4th. I only meant to avoid him, keep him away, but I think I may have started some kind of game. What is even more strange is I think I'm enjoying it. The look on his face, the way he watched me walk out of the room. I almost felt happy. After hiding for so long, after being afraid for so long, I forgot what that felt like. But it doesn't change things. Pat keeps going to work. Nolan doesn't wake up. I spend time taking care of the kids, and Jake watches from the edges of the room like a shadowed guardian. I have a routine. Nothing's changed at school, but there's a pressing fear, a growing sense of foreboding, and I wonder, what is the source of my fear? There seems to be some gaps in my memories, stories that Mom told me, something I've forgotten, but that has left an impression of impending danger. When it's time to put the kids to bed, I stay in Jake's room. Not because he's having nightmares, but because the fear squeezing my chest is so much worse when I'm alone in my room. I tell him about how the abilities of Descendants manifest. I'm able to influence minds and increase the speed of healing in a physical body. Mom's words come back to me again. You've inherited more than most. You have a great responsibility. Maybe it's because I can do two different things. There are descendants that can influence waves of light, touch the elements of the earth, combine elements on an atomic level, think as fast as a computer, control the elements of the air, increase the strength of sound waves, and even bend light particles around time. I'm sure there are more. I was only 7 when I left, and my brother was the smart one. He liked to develop new technology with his knowledge. He would have changed the world if he hadn't disappeared with the rest of my family. Xander Calivan. Xander Calivan sat rigid in his chair, staring straight ahead. His secretary, Miss Littleton, stood in front of him, reading off the meeting schedule for the day. He adjusted the frame on his desk that contained a picture of Jaren in his football uniform, a smile as big as the sky. Only 2 papers remained from his search, sitting in front of Xander now, lined on the edge of his desk with precision. Mr. Calivan? Mrs. Littleton had her pen poised over her clipboard. Xander pulled his hand away from Jaren's picture and re-straightened the papers on his desk. Can you repeat the last question? Miss Littleton didn't answer right away. She stared at Xander with a look of perplexed concern. Would you like me to reschedule the governor for your lunch hour, or ask him to wait until next week? Xander shrugged off the momentary lack of focus. The meeting with Vox had shaken him, but his research into Caden Bachman's 4 other holdings had chilled him to the core. No one knew the vast empire of Caden Bachman, but 3 of the 4 declared bankruptcy in the last year. His contacts with other companies had not returned calls or emails. Crickets. Tell him it took some doing, but we can fit him in today, Xander said, folding his hands to keep from fiddling with anything. He'd learned to cover his nerves after so many years. Another voice broke in. Cancel it. The voice was quiet, full of authority, and sent a chill of fear down Xander's spine. He closed his eyes for an instant. The news article of a CEO's gruesome death flashed through his mind. Clear Mr. Calivan's schedule for the day. Excuse me? Miss Littleton said in her no-nonsense 6th-grade teacher voice. She could inspire obedience from the most self-aggrandized business tycoon, but this was above her skill level. That's all right, Miss Littleton. Xander interrupted her before she could go on. Please clear my schedule for the day. That will be all. He dismissed her with a curt nod. Miss Littleton fluffed up like a ruffled rooster, but then she took stock of herself. Yes, sir. She turned on the heel of her shoe and left the office. Xander let out a small breath of relief. Miss Littleton closed the door behind her, and Xander was left facing the very man he'd been thinking about. Caden Bachman stood just inside the door. A second man stood at Caden Bachman's shoulder, like a wingman or an over-anxious intern. They both wore business suits, custom-tailored, made of the smoothest material. The second man looked plain enough, too plain. The man's features showed no emotion, almost like his face was made of wax. His hair lay perfectly on his head, like each strand had been intentionally placed. Please have a seat. Xander motioned to the 2 chairs on the far side of his desk. Neither man moved to take a chair. Xander remained standing. I've come to collect on your contract, said Caden Bachman. My contract? Xander lifted the papers he'd lined up on his desk. You receive a quarterly payout of 30% of our profits above and beyond your initial investment into the company. We are the #1 profiting company in your holdings and have produced all your private technology on time and without cost. I am the best investment you've ever made. I am in no way in breach of contract. He held the papers out, one a list of numbers, amounts in the millions of dollars that Caden Bachman received from XC Energy. The second, a list of privately requested items that the technology department had produced and handed over to Caden Bachman for patents. He had yet to see any of the technological marvels hit the public sector. Xander thought Caden would ignore the papers he held out. But after a moment, Caden stepped forward and took the paper with a list of projects from Xander's hand. These have proven very successful, Caden said. In fact, it is because of the WWAR that your contract is being called in for fulfillment. You mean the satellite that was sensitive enough to pick up the electromagnetic field around a human being from the upper atmosphere? Xander remembered that project. He had to do some clever bookkeeping to keep that project from showing on his quarterly reports. He'd donated over $100 million to a nonprofit charity he'd created. They'd had to install extra software on the satellite that analyzed the data on population growth and the effect on climate to keep the nonprofit legit. He hadn't told Caden Bachman about the extra software, but it was insignificant, sending the smallest number of ones and zeros down to his personal computer, only several megabytes of data that would hardly be noticed compared to the rest of the satellite and specifications Caden Bachman had requested. Yes. Caden ran his finger along the edge of Xander's desk. Xander resisted an urge to slap his hand away. We've found it most useful in our search and are ready to move to the next phase. And this next phase includes me? Xander felt himself relax. He'd been so worried Caden Bachman had come to shut him down, destroy his life's work like with the other companies. But Caden needed him, understood his value. If you give me the specifications, I'll get working on it right away. This project is going to require more involvement from someone more dedicated. The sudden shift from calm to panic left Xander breathless. There is no one more dedicated to this business than me. I remember your competitive spirit and business sense, but I think you mistake those qualities for the quality that made me choose you over others. In his attempt to remain professional, to keep from showing the swirling chaos rising in him, Xander thought of what his son would say. Perhaps you picked me for my good looks and hypnotic charm, Xander said, pushing his lapels up and straightening his shoulders. The thought of his son snapped his senses into sharp relief, like smelling salts had been passed beneath his nose. He had to focus, like he did in every business meeting. Find the chink, find the opportunity. Money. Caden said the word clipped, with finality. Excuse me? Xander asked, raising an eyebrow. Your passion. For money, very few would go to the lengths you did to succeed. But you've forgotten the original deal. Bachman lifted the picture of Jaren from the desk. Or perhaps you've become distracted. Xander stepped around the desk and took the picture from Caden's hands. He set it carefully back down. He faced Caden, meeting his eyes. I'm more focused than ever, Xander said. Bachman placed his thumb under Xander's collarbone and squeezed the back of his neck with his fingers. It could have almost looked like a friendly squeeze on the shoulder if it wasn't for the pain that flashed through Xander's mind and forced him to his knees. Caden leaned over him, pupils expanding until the eyes were like black pits. Xander felt the sensation of falling. He heard voices swirling in the darkness, saw a younger version of himself, an ageless version of Caden standing across a smaller desk in a smaller office. He saw the words in fine print on a document in front of his younger self as he raised the pen to sign. Xander wanted to yell at himself not to do it, take it back, but he couldn't speak. He could only watch as the vision grew blurry, his focus on the document, the tiny print growing bigger until it was all he could see. In exchange for the investment, Xander Caliban forfeits his soul. It was impossible. Those words couldn't have been there. Xander had read through it. Surely he would have read every word in that contract, memorized it before making the agreement. He would now, for sure. But had he been that ambitious back then? Bachman released his grip on Xander's shoulder, as well as his hold on his mind. Xander scrambled backward, rubbing his shoulder. He knocked over his office chair and had to use his desk to stabilize himself as he rose to his feet. You can't be serious. Xander spit the words despite the fear that gripped him. I have done everything you asked. I am the reason for your success. If you kill me, your precious satellite will go offline. I've seen what you've been doing to others, and I've put some precautions in place. The favor for Vox seemed like they had been more of a favor to himself. "You've already sold your soul to me," Caden said. "I've come to collect." "My soul is not for sale. Everyone's soul has a price," Caden said. "It seems yours has changed. I will leave Provis to watch over you until the time is right." Caden motioned to his wax-faced assistant. Xander's mouth was dry, and he tried to swallow against the rising panic. "Why must we wait?" The assistant's voice grew in frustration, sounding more like the whispered screams of tortured prisoners. Xander wanted to cover his ears and cower behind his desk. He kept his back straight. Caden Bachman looked into Xander's eyes, and Xander felt the weakness in his knees. He kept his fist planted against the desk to keep from collapsing. "He must choose to serve me," Caden said, leaning in closer, the darkness swirling behind his eyes. "He will never choose it," Provis said, a desperate whining that made the hairs rise on Xander's arm. "Let me free him, and I will weaken him. He will come to you begging for relief." Xander stood taller. Despite the fear, he would go through hell if it meant denying this creature the satisfaction of touching his soul. "No." Bachman opened the door. The shift of pressure created a wind strong enough to knock the picture of Jaren off the edge of Xander's desk. "He already has a weakness, the love of a son."